on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on the respective app stores and iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire Sticks, Roku Sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Today, I have an amazing guest that I personally have known since she was a teenager. And her and I have the opportunity to rekindle and get to know each other again just recently, a couple weeks ago, at an event that we both got to contribute at. And it was interesting because when I got to see Julia there, it was like, oh my gosh, she's an adult now. Like what happened?
Yeah.
Like in a blink of an eye, it's like she grew up all of a sudden. And, one of the things that I loved about Julia is that no matter what obstacles came her way or what she ever dealt with, she always had this beautiful smile on her face. And she was just brave. Like if I would think of the word brave, I'd always think of Julia. And, we got to speaking and talking about, a book that she was going to publish when she was younger. And I said, oh, what was that? And she says, it was an open letter from a teenager to parents. And I said, interesting. And I knew Julia's family and I knew her mom really well. And it's interesting what we don't know and what we assume that we know about a relationship or what we see. And what I realize is how many masks our kids put on for other people to not know what's really going on and the struggles that they really have. Because I could look at Julia's family and be like, oh my gosh, they're so great. Like I look at her and her mom and her and Anne are so close and best friends, and they may have been, but yet there's also been challenges and there's also been struggles and stuff. So I asked Julia, as one of my youngest guests that I've ever had on Redefine Parenting, to join us and give an opening of like, help us open the eyes of parents to what is the facade that we think as parents that is going on with our kids that we think is like, oh, everything's great. I have a great relationship. And yet there's still struggles. So without further ado, Julia, welcome to Redefine Parenting. Thank you, my love, for coming here and sharing your open heart and the conversation we're about to have today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege. I'm so excited for what the next 50 minutes are going to unfold and what wonderful knowledge we get to crack open. And we're just going to be raw and real and see what we can learn.
Yes, yes. So let's just dive in. Like, when you and I were talking just a few weeks ago, I was like actually taken back, like, wow, like she would write a book like this. I mean, I thought you would write a book on the challenges of being in America, not knowing how to speak English and learning how to speak English without an accent. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, that was not it.
Nope. No. I mean, I think it originates from the relationship that I had with my mom. And, growing up in the personal development world, I definitely had a solid transition from disliking a lot of the people that, my parents went to an event on a Thursday and had a very normal German marriage of cold, we don't talk about feelings, this is the day-to-day 9 to 5, etc. And then we're coming back and we're dancing and drinking green smoothies and talking about feelings. I'm like, I'm sorry, you were gone for 4 days. You can't expect me to just be an open book. To joining the system myself and then having everyone already know my mom and have all these other situations. I'm like, okay, everyone has this image of what life is. That's not my truth. And then also having to learn that my truth isn't everyone else's truth, and that is necessarily reality. But we're all going, like, it's the same characters, it's the same people, same household, but very, very different perceptions of what was going on. And so really seeing that transition with my mom, going from like, we went months without speaking, living under the same roof. After even having tools to help us get through that, we were not in a place. And then it really got to a point where I was like, I'd just gone to my first youth leadership summit. I was like, if we continue like this, you're not going to meet your grandkids. You're not coming to my wedding. And the day I move out, like, this is over. But I don't want that. But
So
that is.
what do you think was like, what took you there? Because I mean, we all have struggles. I mean, I remember the struggles I had with my mom, like she sent me to India on my 16th birthday because she thought that I was bad here in America and she needed to make me better. So she sent me to a boarding school. So, I mean, we all have our challenges, but that's pretty extreme to say, you know what, if we keep going like this, like I'm done. Like I cut you off of everything in the future that could be. What is going on in your mind at that age?
So I think it's such a multitude of issues going on. You know, we have our life at home, which is one thing. And then you have that entire world of the second you leave the house, you have school and your teachers, and you have sports, and you have clubs and societies, and your friends, and you have nice people and not nice people. And then you have the whole multitude of just becoming a teenager and starting to question your body, your health, your ambitions, your vision, your dreams. And when all of those collide and they all of a sudden don't fit in that cookie cutter shape that someone might have had for you or you had for yourself, and things all of a sudden aren't in the lines that were either written by yourself or by someone else, things can heat up. And I know that with my mom, it was mostly emotional, of just this
Mm,
emotional lack of understanding of what I was going through. And a lot of, I think, comes from that generational divide where I think everything post this internet introduction. I think the
yes.
internet has a lot of impact. And my generation was really one of the first ones that had Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook. So now we had everything happen at school, but when you got home, a lot of that social interaction continued. And naturally, a lot of that is also great. We love being able to connect with friends from abroad, blah, blah, blah. But it also gives people a chance to hide behind this facade of what they want their life to be. And especially regarding, so like image situations. This was a time where Photoshop, like now we're starting to uncover and talk positive body image. 2010, 2011, we're not there yet,
Yeah.
And so I was really in this image of this is who I needed to be. This is who I thought my mom wanted to be. That's another reality that ended up not being true. But I had this image of what I thought she wanted me to be, causing so many emotional issues that we never actually spoke about. And it was just, she would perceive my emotions, I would perceive hers. And at the end of the day, we both just sat down and were like, wait, what? What? There was so much uncovering when we finally sat down and talked about it, and just saying, like, I didn't feel that way, but she thought
Mm.
I was angry. And that was just me being like, no, I was just a teenager and wanted some alone time. And then the other thing where like it would be like, oh, I would sleep in. And she's like, oh, you're depressed. And I'm like, no, I'm just tired because I binged watched Grey's Anatomy last night, but I didn't want you to know about that. So I'm gonna go take, but it was these, we never actually talked about what was the truth. And sometimes it would be as shallow as Grey's Anatomy and waking up depressed, but it would also exert to the only time you would get positive recognition is through good grades, which then, starts an academic cycle or whatever it was for everyone at their point in life. But it was never the truth. Her and I never talked about what was actually going on. And so once we did, whole new world.
Well, I think it's so interesting, like, you opened up a lot of different things that go on that I actually talk about in this show is that, until we start being more curious and not critical, we're never going to know what's really going on. Because I get a lot of clients on a day-to-day basis where like the parents will contact me and like, oh, I think my child's depressed. And I'm like, okay, so what specifically is he or she doing or not doing that's making you feel that way? Oh, they're in their room. When they get home, they want to take a nap. Like most kids should be out and doing things. And I said, well, have you asked them like what is going on? Because even when you look at the development of the brain of a teenager, they need more sleep. Like their brain
Mm-hmm.
is on like massive growth. And it is scientifically proven. Like there is more sleep that is needed.
Absolutely.
And if your child is staying up, binge watching Grey's Anatomy, and you have no idea, and then you're taking that as an interpretation of, oh, they're depressed because they're taking a nap after school now when they had to push themselves
Mm,
to get up and push through school. And you don't know
yeah,
how many naps they took in school either, by the way, because the teachers aren't telling you because they're so tired.
exactly.
They're not depressed. They're just sleep
No,
deprived. And
exactly.
the parents aren't asking. And that's what it is. It's like they're not
No,
asking. The communication's not there. And so I think that,
yeah.
it kind of, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I want to know your, especially from your opinion as a young child, as going to an adult now, but being able to look back through all the feelings that you had. It's, is it the lack of communication that brings us to this? The lack of
I,
curiosity.
yeah, I think that is really the fundamental point, that we don't communicate and we don't give kids the opportunity to speak. And whatever the reaction is, whether it be a teenager or a child, acting out is a communication, a message that we're simply just not reading and understanding what's actually going on. And so I
Mm,
think we look a lot at the symptoms, but not at the actual cause.
I
And
love
so we
it.
see the symptom of sleep deprivation or lashing out at a parent or being on their phone all the time or all these things, instead of saying, well, why is this going on? And instead of then having that own why of maybe having a chat with your partner and saying, oh, why do you think this person's depressed? Having a chat with that person and saying, why are you on your phone so often? Not even going as far to say, why are you depressed? Because then we're making that conclusion, but saying, hey, I really feel like you're on your phone a lot these days. Is there a reason for that? And then they go, hey, I have a group project in English due on Monday and we're talking about it. And you're like, cool. I'm glad
Right,
it's just that.
right.
And then sometimes they'll be rawly honest, because kids, especially kids, they don't know how to lie yet. They're not taught to lie. That comes much later on. And naturally, if deception is a part of it, and I wasn't always honest, I know that. But my mom also made it very clear to me, says, if you don't want to talk about it, then say that, you
Mm,
know? And
mm,
teaching me to then just say, hey, I'm going through some stuff right now. And I just kind of want to be alone, but I'm okay, you
right.
know? And then she would be like, okay, well, if you need anything, I'm here. And then I have that feeling of, oh, I'm being supported. And no matter what, I can go to her and talk about it. But also saying, hey, my crush doesn't like me. I don't really want to talk about it with my mom. And that's also okay at 15. You don't need to have
Right.
conversations like these with every parent. But they're probably like, especially amongst girls, I would say we talk a lot to our friends. And with your teenage boy, it's probably a lot more difficult, because they might not talk about it and they might actually be looking for that conversation, saying, hey, I'd really like to talk to my mom about the reason this girl doesn't like me, you know? And it's just about opening that conversation. And that's not going to happen from like, okay, we have a horrible relationship with our mom and dad and we're going to go to coffee and it's all going to be there.
Right,
Done.
right.
No, 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 no. We got to get there. But when you do, it flows.
I love what you're saying because it's exactly, one of the messages that I talk about. And if we're going to parent our kids, we need to redefine like how it was when we were growing up. Because, like you said, there's a huge generation. Like you and I are born in two different generations. I know that you're friends with one of my kids, and I even look at his generation and your generation, and I'm like, it is so different. And when you start talking like that and we allow our kids to have that open, safe, and trusting space, it's like you said, you guys want to open up more. You want to tell us more because you're trusting that we're not judging you. And we're hearing that, hey, I need space. Nothing against you. I need space. And there are parents who say, oh, no, 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 no. Like, you could talk to me. And then they force themselves because they want to solve it. Because we, as parents, not everybody, but some parents, like to believe that their kids are their measuring tool if they're doing it right, if they're a good parent or not. And you
Mm-hmm.
guys are not it. You're not our measuring tool. You're not the ones to
No,
say, I screwed up as a parent because you acted that way, versus I did everything right as a parent and you still acted that way and you still
yeah,
made that choice to do that. And you decided that, you know what? I want to have those consequences because I'm going to learn from it regardless that you told me not to do it. I made a choice to do it and it's okay. And you're not a bad mom for that because I did hear you and I
nope,
still made the conscious choice to do it. So I'm curious,
absolutely.
what was your outcome for starting to create this book? And I know that you have an insert about it and I would love for you to read it. But before you do, what made you feel like, you know what, this needs to be said, like this needs to get out here? Like what was your outcome
Mm,
for wanting this? And hopefully this show is going to actually help you continue on that and get it out there.
yeah. Well, it was exactly that critical conversation that I then had with my mom when I was 14, where I was like, we need to change. And I mean, the the child in me was screaming for the love of her mom in that conversation. I was like, more than anything, do I want a relationship with you? And the reason I'm saying this now at 14 is because I don't want that to be our truth. And I understand that if we don't change course now and we don't start doing the little things now, that when I do hit 30 in my reality, that is going to be what we're going to do. And it won't be a cup of coffee that we can then fix, because we'll be so stuck in our patterns and so much will have happened that has concretized that we won't be able to come back from that.
Right.
And so that was such a tabula rasa moment for my mom and I, because from there on out, we then went on like weekly nail appointments or like coffee dates, and we got to know each other. It started with like, what's your favorite color? Like, what's the best book you read growing up? And then it started talking about her and her parenting and the parenting she received from her parents. And I'm like, wow, okay, so you went so drastic in the other direction because you were so upset at your father for this that you then did it differently with me, where probably half of that would have been enough, you know? But learning and understanding these patterns throughout time, her and I got to actually practice forgiveness and say I'm sorry, and we still do. There's every other week we call each other like, "Hey, I'm really sorry about that one time," because we then become aware of it. But we now, like, she's my best friend, you know, and she's now someone who I want by my side for every moment of my life. And I know that that hard conversation was the reason that we got to where we are today, and it took a lot of work. And that's why then at like 17, 18, 3 years after that chat, started writing this book, just being like, what could have helped my mom understand me in that? Because yes, I was a 15-year-old, and yes, I understand a lot, but there's also an element of, I think if she had just known what was going on with me, half of it would have been easier. Because
Right.
we also can't expect teenagers to understand parental trauma. I mean, most of the time we're still in this phase of they know everything and have figured out, not realizing they're also just in their 30s and are also just dealing with the world and
Right.
making every decision that they make is the best decision that they thought it was at the time. But you can't necessarily harmonize that at 12, 14, 17 because you're like, well, you have it all figured out. I don't need to make it up to this perfect person. And so that's the origination of like this letter. And I think now would actually be a great time to read
Yeah.
it. It's a bit,
Just
I'm going to
before you get
remind,
started real quick, I just wanted
yeah,
to kind of concretize what you're saying because this show, I always say, it's give your kids a childhood they don't have to heal from. And just by what you're saying, like you're the epitome of that. Like just to think at 14, when you're like, you know what, we're either going to heal this or we're going to end this. Even at 14, 15 years old, going into that, and your frontal lobe's not developed, you have no idea. Now you're closer to 30 now, just a couple of years, right? And like you're
I know.
and now you get to look back but the feelings are still real. They were still real then. And what
Yeah,
a blessing that you were able to heal it then, because now when you're almost 30, you're not having to heal it now. And so I just want our listeners to hear what Julia is saying here. It's like, this is the time to have those tough conversations and be open and hear what your child is trying to say. It's if they're saying, hey, I'm going through this, no offense to you, mom, and I just need to go through it. And if I need you, I know you're there, but give me space. When you give them space, now all of a sudden they feel they can trust you because they've been heard by you. And that's
yeah,
literally what Julia is saying that happened and had that conversation. And so now we're going to hear one of her excerpts that she found for this show
yeah,
specifically, just to kind of hear what she was going through in that moment.
absolutely. And I think I just want to piggyback one sentence on that that I think was so critical that I've learned over these years is it's not your parents' job to be your best friend.
I love it.
And I luckily had that because I had some really relatively tough and strict parenting, but I see it a lot in today's parenting that the parents are really trying because they're emotionally looking for that connection, trying to get down onto that teen level and like gossip and get in there, but it's not your job. It's not your
Mm-mm.
job to be your
No.
child's best friend. And my mom is a big kudos to her. She was all my best friend's best friend. She was the mom that everyone else came to and confided in. And so she was always that person who was that external voice of reason, that parent who then they could listen to when in their homes they couldn't. And I saw that. But with me, she always made it very clear it's like, I love you and I'm going to listen to you, but I'm also your parent and I will intervene when time needs to be. And I mean, they teach you the morals from the beginning on and your values and everything else. And we don't need to be best friends with our parents. That can come when you're 30 and you're
Absolutely.
good and the parenting's done, so to speak, you know?
Amen to that because I tell parents all the time is that your kids don't need another friend. They can go find a friend right now. And I've
Exactly.
always been like that with, my sons, Cameron and Connor, now that who are adults, 28 and 24. And it's like now we've created a friendship where they share with me because they know that I can't be so critical because they're not in my home anymore. They're an adult. And they're like, so I'm just going to let you know. And I'm like, I mean, okay. And you know what? They want my opinion because they want my
Yeah.
opinion as, what do you think about this? Not give me your opinion as my mom so I make the right choice. Like they're already going to make
Yeah.
their choice. They want it as like another voice of reason, if you would. So,
Hmm.
and it's a beautiful, the friendship that me and my boys have been able to establish. And and there's a huge line for when I need to be a parent still because
Yeah.
they still need their mama.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's, like I have a very different relationship with my father than I do with my mother. And I would definitely say that, I'm going to say this as nicely as I can. My mother is a lot more emotionally evolved and has done the work on her past. And it's so much easier to have a conversation with her about certain things. But I know that, like with my father, it's a yes or no answer. And it's a very parenting answer still. But with my
Mm.
mom, I can also just be like, hey, hypothetically, how do we feel about me applying for XYZ? And she'd be like, oh, I think you'd be a good match, da 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 da. But I think these are some of the struggles you might have. But, you have that open conversation. At the end of the day, it's not a no, don't do that. That's horrendous. Or yes, absolutely. That's going to give you a successful life. It's a coffee date and you discuss pros and cons. And it's
Love it.
very different than if I go to my father, where it's that.
I love it.
But yeah, so I'm gonna disclaimer, this is a 16-year-old me writing this. So it's a bit more emotionally loaded than I would probably write now, but I think it actually hits it on the head of what teenagers then, which is what, 5, 6 years ago now? Oh gosh, 10 years ago now?
I was like, the 10
I'm
years
just
now.
making myself younger. But I think it also resonates a lot with the teens of today. So I start with, dear parents, this is my place to open up to you so that our relationship can grow and we can understand each other more. I know it doesn't always seem like it, but I want you in my life. I want you to be a part of my growing up, and I want to be able to communicate with you. You to guide me, and I want your support. And more than anything, I want you to be proud of me and to love me unconditionally. I often feel misunderstood by you. I feel like the little child you want me to be, but I'm growing up. And I feel like you cannot relate to me for my societal pressures are much more immense than yours were 30 years ago. I feel like you don't understand the pressure to look a certain way. I feel like you value my grades more than my morals. I feel like you don't listen. I do not feel good enough, and I feel unloved. That
Mm.
was a load. And then comes, now I know none of these feelings may necessarily be your fault, but the world we live in today creates these realities and perspectives that tear one down internally. All we see on social media is how thin your waist is supposed to be, how big your boobs should be, and how great your abs have to be. We see the media full of Photoshop and makeup, and we're practically forced to believe that our natural essence is no longer good enough for those around us. It's a feeling of internal worth that is reflected through our outer appearances. The feeling of looking in the mirror and only seeing your flaws, of practically coming to hate yourself and not even recognizing who you are. If I feel this way, then I need your support. I need your love. I need your assurance that who I am at the core and the essence of my being is good enough. That the only thing that truly matters is that you know who I am, which in this case is an amazing person, and that you know that I'm a good person. I know that I know that how I feel isn't necessarily the truth, but it is my truth, and it often feels like my reality. I know I'm capable of rewriting my own truth, but it helps tremendously to have your support along the way.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. Right. And you were how old? 16 when you wrote that? 16. And I will tell you, because I coach a lot of teenagers. And my sweet spot seems to be between 12 and 26 is my sweet spot of
Yeah.
clients I have. And I will say that that probably hits the head of a lot of them. Like a
Yeah.
lot of the clients that I coach, if they don't feel that now, they had felt it once before, somewhere
Exactly.
along their passage. And I would even go out on a limb to say, my kids felt that. My kids felt that. And it's not to say that us parents are doing anything wrong. It's there's always another way to do it. And if we're not open
Mm,
to saying like, how else can I show up for my kids? What else can I do for my kids? And we're so stuck on, nope, this is how it has to be because I have to give them these values and I have to give them these standards. And this is how it's going to be, or they're not going to be a good kid or a good person in society. And I have failed as a parent. Once again, measurement tool, right? If we don't decide to take that off, this is what our kids continue to be as an adult. And then they go on as an adult searching for those answers to know, hey, I'm good enough. What is unconditional love? Am I okay if I don't look like that person I'm sitting next to or that person on Vogue magazine? Am I okay as the person I became? Did I disappoint you? Am I a disappointment to society? Like these are the questions that we grow up in. And I know this as an adult because these are some of the things that I had to struggle with as an adult when I finally got into the whole personal development to say, I deserve to grow as a person and I don't have to just take this as my story. There's another story out there. So what happens is, because those words are brilliant, Julia. I mean, I think that even I can feel those like as my words. Like when you're saying I'm getting tears in my eyes, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's a letter I would have wrote to my mom at 16, because
Yeah.
it really sums it up.
Mhm.
It really does. So
Yeah.
who was the brave one? Was it your mom who stepped out and said, okay, we got to fix this? Was it you as a child? Like, help, like, what are the listeners, how, if the listeners are hearing this and are like, oh my gosh, is this my child's letter? Maybe it is your child's
Yeah.
letter. So what do they do with it now? Like, who goes first?
It doesn't even matter. I would say it doesn't matter who goes first as long as someone does. And so for me, it was really attending the Youth Leadership Summit. And I know that that first year, I would call it the year about myself. I had to learn how to love myself and who I am. And I remember the first time I was forced to look in a mirror, and I mean, actually look,
Hmm.
stood in front of that mirror for like 20 minutes crying. But that was something I had to do with myself because the damage had already been done. And you can come from a perfect family home. This can happen from anywhere. This can happen from school, social media, can happen anywhere. It's not a parent's reflection of how your child sees themselves at a certain point. And so that first year was really about me. And then the second year when I returned, I started looking at the relationships around me and in my life. And the number one burning relationship was the one with my mom, where I was
Mm,
like, so much of what I had discovered the year before also originated from her. And a lot of that feeling came from how her and I had interacted and values I had taken on from how she sees herself. And I was like, whoa, this isn't even my ish, but I'm carrying it because that's how she felt about herself. And it wasn't until I really went to her, I was like, look, I don't know the way. I don't know how we're gonna do it. And I'm not gonna lie, there were some awkward coffee dates where it was as if you had like flashcards questions of like, what are we gonna talk about today? You know? And other ones were easy. And I know that there's certain studies that say if you're home for the first like 15 minutes of your kid returning from school, that's your time frame to hear what's actually going on. Because the second they go to their room and they have cookies an hour later and you go, how was your day? They're like, fine.
mhm.
And it's the same thing. So if you can open that can of worms and get a conversation started, whatever that is, it might be their favorite subject at school. And why are they liking it? And getting them to talk about something passionate that just opens up this channel of thing and then figuring it doesn't matter what the topic is, we're always able to relate, is my honest belief. Like you can talk to me about astrophysics, and I would be like, that is so cool. I'm also curious about things. It's not necessarily astrophysics, but curiosity, and then building bridges off of that and saying, no, I had a really bad day at school. I got a C on my test and I didn't feel good enough. And I really studied and I really tried, but external parameters have said that I'm not good enough. And then being like, oh, I've felt that way. And talking about things like that, or just being like, oh, well, let's talk about it instead of being like, wow, my child just said they failed a test. That might not be what they need to get into Harvard or whatever the image is around it. But when you're looking at a relationship, it's not about what you want.
Right. And you brought up something really important, I think. And like, I just want to segue a little bit to like grades. Like, when kids say, I'm scared to tell my parents that I got this grade, they're not scared of the punishment. That's not what they're scared of. They're scared that you're going to reiterate to them that they're not good enough. That's what they're
Absolutely.
afraid of. And
Absolutely.
Julia's here to say that, like, she was the kid and now she's the adult looking back at the kid, and like, that's what it is. Like, if I bring you this C, are you going to tell me that I'm not good enough? Now,
Yeah.
I'm not good enough does not look like, really, you got to see you're not good enough. I'm not good enough looks like a C. I mean, did you study? I mean, could you have done something different? Like, I mean, like, why
Like
did you
what
get,
happened?
like, what happened? That's how they're hearing I'm not good enough. What they
Yeah.
could hear to feel supported is, I can see that you feel disappointed about it. What would you have wanted to get instead? And is there anything I could have done to support you? That is them hearing, wow, you mean you care about me? I am good enough for you and you want to help me. Like you're not judging me,
Mm,
like you love me. This is unconditional love.
yeah.
That's unconditional love. And that's what kids need to know that now, mind you, there are kids out there that don't do great and the parents are at their wits' end because they watch their kids not put in effort. They watch them come home and play video games, get on their phones. They have no boundaries and they're not doing the work. They're not studying. And yeah, their grades are reflecting that. There's times to maybe put different boundaries around your kids.
Mhm.
I'm talking, and I think Julia, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about the kids that are putting the effort in, that are still having a difficult time. Maybe it's the teacher and they don't get along. There's no rapport between the teacher and them. Maybe it's the subject has gotten so difficult. Maybe someone in their class has intimidated them so they don't feel like open to ask questions because they feel like they're going to get
Mm,
bullied or teased or something. So now they're like really lost. Maybe they feel like there's not enough money to get a tutor and they don't want to put you out. So they're doing everything that they can to figure out the subject and they're just not getting it. We don't know unless we're curious.
yeah. And maybe it also sometimes comes from what we're doing at home. Like
Mm,
I know that the relationship my parents had between each other took a heavy weight on my childhood because I was just consistently worried. And I knew that if I brought anything home that could strain that, any argument, so I knew bringing home good grades would create no argument. And a bad grade would create a fight between them at night. So I
mm.
was academically driven by fear, not
Uh,
even of my own value, but because I wanted to keep peace in the house, you
so
know?
I just want the listeners to hear that because, that's huge. And that's honestly something I didn't even think about, but true is that, if you already see there's, you know, um, tension in the home, that's
Hmm.
not great tension. And you feel that you're going to be the cause of creating more tension.
Yeah.
Maybe as a child you heard like, "Do you see what your father's going through? Do you see what you did?" Like, if there's already blame somewhere in your childhood and it's now has stacked, the last thing you wanna do
Hmm.
is add to that and know that it was your fault your parents fought, or your fault your parents separated, or your fault that they divorced. You know,
Exactly.
kids don't want to feel like they're the blame of what's going
No.
wrong in the home.
Yeah. And having a portal and like you said, that reaction of when I come home with this, C saying, "Hey, what could I have done better?" That is the foundation of a conversation, you know?
Mm,
And that's when you really then just have the permission to listen. Listen to what your child is saying that because they're probably, especially at the beginning of a relationship, not gonna be like, "Well, if I come home with a C, you and mom or you and dad are gonna fight."
mm.
That's probably not gonna be the first sentence right out the door unless you have a very emotionally intelligent teenager who's already reflected on it and is able to speak about that. However, it's gonna look like, "Oh, well," and then dodging bullets, kind of avoiding the conversation, and if you see the child is mitigating that, ask them. You'll very quickly see what takes bite and what doesn't. You'll see the ones where it's a paper argument of just like, "I was hungry and I was focused on lunchtime." Like, "Okay, well, how about we get a granola bar next time and you just make sure you eat it before class?" And they're like, "Oh." And so now this argument has been eradicated and they know the next time it happens, if they had a granola bar before, they're going to have a new argument. And you might have to go through that process 5, 10, 15 times until the reasons run out. But you're essentially at one point or another going to get to the truth of that, despite maybe your child having a C semester, because it takes you that long to uncover what's actually going on. And that's so, like, that conversation again is just the essence of understanding your teenager.
Well, I love it because, in the past, I've also talked about creating that conversation when they get home and don't just take fine or good. How's your day? Good. It's digging deeper. What was good about it? Was there a magic moment? Is
Hmm.
there that you're struggling with that I could support you on? Is there anything you want to vent about? Because again, our kids need to know that we're not there to fix everything, because that's another reason why kids don't tell us stuff, because they don't feel like they want you to fix it. But yet they want to get it off their chest. They want to talk to you. They want to tell you, hey, this is going on in school and I don't feel it's appropriate. And yet I don't want you to fix it. I just want to be able to vent about it and just to get it off my chest. And so,
Mhm.
are we allowing our kids to have that space? So sometimes it's like, look, is there anything you just want to vent about, that you don't
Mhm.
want me to fix, but you just want to get it off your chest? It's creating that conversation so they know. And it may not be today. Today, it may be no, no, no. And 2 years from now, when they're in high school, they're like, okay, now I want to vent about this. Now I want to tell you what I'm
Mhm.
doing, because you have
Yeah.
those seeds along the way.
Absolutely. And validating your child's feeling along that
Mm,
process is so important. Like, I remember there was a crystal clear moment. I had come home from school. I With my first period teacher, I could not stand her. Her and I were just not on the same page. It was not gonna happen. And she had asked me how my day was, and I had been carrying this grudge about her all day. And so I let loose like a cannon. I was using words. I was being absolutely derogatory and disrespectful to her. I'm fully aware of that. But that was how I was feeling at the time. My mom was at the fridge and she goes, "Well, what a beep." And I'm like, "You're right. She totally is." And like we almost bonded over it. And her just being like, this is a kid to kid conversation, but her giving me that space then gave her insight into saying, "Oh, Julia really hates this teacher. And at parent teacher conferences, this could be a situation." And
mm,
to take everything with a grain of salt. And it just gave it then opened a conversation for me to also be like, "Oh, well, hey, in this other class that I actually really love, I feel like my professor doesn't like me, blah, 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 blah." And then I really got to go to the actual deep emotional things that were giving me turmoil. Like, I didn't care about that teacher. It wasn't about her. But
mm.
her giving me that permission and validating, like, all right, we don't like her. Cool. Who else don't we like? Is there a bully at school? All right, let's, and not encouraging the gossip and not being like, oh, well, what they do, what they say, but being like, hmm, because the second you have more context to the situation, you're able to mitigate that a lot more. And it gives you just so much more insight into what's actually going on. Because it's the things that we don't say that tend to be the problem than the ones that we do say. And the more you get your kid to talk, doesn't even matter about what, the more you know.
Right. So I'm curious, Juliet. So, as a teenager who felt the way you did about your parents, and there was obviously friction going on, if any of our listeners are having that with their kids and they're hearing this and they're like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and have that conversation. What are some ways, like, what could your mom do to, number one, create the conversation and you be willing to trust that she really means what she's saying? Like, the first thing that comes to my mind is to change the environment. Like, don't do it at home. Like, go somewhere on neutral ground where it's not like, okay, let's go to the living room and have a conversation. you know um, what could you tell parents who are listening right now that really feel like, oh gosh, I hear Julia, and I'm going to go first. I want to have this conversation. What can they do?
Mm. So I think you hit the spot on the nail regarding the neutral ground. And so my mom and I, we always went either to like a Starbucks or a nail salon. That was really our first two places because that's also who I'm as a teenager. I really enjoyed that. That was a rare occasion for me. And, that was like you're starting to explore coffee. So it's kind of cool. And Starbucks isn't really coffee. So that was like her meeting me on something she knew that I wanted. And so not quite a bribe, but just something where we know we're going to have enjoyment in doing this. And so with my brother, for instance, and I think like every parent kind of has a sense for their kids, so you kind of know what they like and what they don't like. So find a common ground of what and suggest it. They can also say, "Oh, hey, not my thing. How about this instead?" Um, the first time my mom had that chat with my brother, which was much harder, she took him to a rage cage and was like, "We're going to go beat some stuff up and let the physical emotions, And so they went, my brother's thinking they're just going to have throw some glasses and plates. But it actually ended up with him then sharing some of the feelings on the car ride home, you know? And car rides are also a good place, I think, just because a car, you're kind of distracted, but as long as it's not heavy traffic, you kind of get to have that open road conversation,
I have a
you
client like
know?
that. I have a client who she'll go on a drive with her family to talk about
Yeah.
things. Like that's her go-to. And I think your brother's really lucky that you had already created this space so your mom already knew, like, I'm not going to let him get there. Like, I'm going to go ahead and have the conversation with him, and I'm going to take him to different space. So what could these parents say? Like, what's an opening thing? Like, I mean, I know I haven't been a good parent. Like, what would you have needed to hear to know that you could trust your mom? And this was going to be that come to Jesus talk where we're going to
Mm,
put everything out on the table.
yeah. So I think the first and most principal thing was really having my mom be in a space where she wasn't gonna get mad at what I was gonna say.
I love it.
Being like, "Mom, I might say something about how I feel right now, and I know this could hurt you. And I know I said that to her, but your child might not be able to say that yet, and they might say something hurtful. They might say, 'Mom, you make me feel unloved.' That is
Mm,
hard for any parent to hear, being like, 'Oh my gosh, my child doesn't feel that way or doesn't feel I don't love them or doesn't feel good enough or whatever it is.' And so really having that distance of saying, okay, this is not an attack on me. This is not a reflection of me, but this is an invitation to understand what my actions might currently be doing and opening that. So I think having my mom have that distance to her feelings and really saying, all right, you're not attacking me. This is not, and I mean, it did, there were other conversations where she needed 2, 3 days to process what I had said, which is also okay because big things could come up. Some might
right.
not.
So what I'm hearing you say is, like, number one, don't take it personally, whatever your kid says. Give
Yes,
them the space to say
absolutely.
whatever they want. Like, they hated you because you kept saying no. They felt unloved because of this. Whatever it is, just take it and receive it and say, okay, I hear
Yeah,
you. I get it. I understand. I appreciate that. Thank you.
yeah. And then following up to that, then having the curiosity and the openness to say, well, how would you like that? So
Mhm.
you feel unloved? Well, how do you feel loved? You know? And you can have so many tools in the background of understanding things like your love languages, but your kid's probably gonna be like, you know what? I really love it when you just give me a hug when I come home. It might be the most small thing that you didn't realize you were doing or weren't doing, um, that you're like, "Wow, this is it?" It could be that simple, and other things might be like, "Hey, I'd really appreciate it if, you come home 1 day a week earlier, and we can just have a bit of time to talk." Like, whatever it is, having that openness to have them tell you, and even using something that, we refer to as the magical question and say, "Oh, I don't know." Well, what if you did know? What
Mhm.
if you did know how you wanted me to love you? Because every child does know. We all
Right.
know the love that we want.
Right. And I would just want to add to that is, um, you know, I called it success formula.
Mm,
What's their success formula? What's their way of feeling appreciated? What's You have to know, because if you keep giving them love the way you think it is, maybe making lunch, you making them lunch, you're saying, "Oh, I love you. I make your lunch every day." But they didn't receive it, so they're not feeling loved. You have to find out, how are they going to receive it? And that's what I'm hearing Julia say. How
yeah.
are they going to receive it? And the other thing is being open to taking the action on it.
Mhm.
Take
So,
action on it.
absolutely. I'm gonna give my mom the biggest kudos, I think, of what she managed to do for my high school years. So my high school started at 7, meaning the bus was coming at 5:45 to 6,
Mm,
which we all know teenagers do not wanna be awake at that hour. It's dark in December, you name it. And I'm not a morning person, especially not during my teenage years. And there was one conversation where I really sat down with her. I was like, please just don't talk to me in the morning. Like, just don't talk to me. I don't want to talk. And she's looking at me like, well, I have to remind her of her dentist appointment and I have to remind her of this. And I have like, so her list is battering. And then she goes, okay, I can do that. But then how do you want me to communicate certain things with you? And I was like,
mm,
good question. We have technology. You can shoot me a text at 11 saying, hey, don't forget you have a dentist appointment today. And she actually then, on her own initiative, started writing me little notes in my lunchbox and saying that way I would, at 11 or 12, when I was awake and half the day had already passed, I would see it and it would always be some kind of, hey, I love you, have a great day, or like good luck on your test or whatever was that day, with the PS, can you grab milk on the way home? Or, whatever it was, but giving me that space and solitude in the morning. And I mean, I kid you not, majority of my high school mornings literally did not say a word, not even good morning.
I love
I
it.
didn't want to hear it.
I love
And I
it.
know that was hard for her. I know that was hard for her, but she did that. And I know that that probably saved us a lot of fights because I
I
would have fired back.
It's funny you say that because like that's one of the things that when I ask my clients, like, what do you need from your parents? They're like, I need them to stop talking to me. Like, I don't want to hear in the morning what I didn't do or I need to do. I don't want to read if I didn't brush my teeth, okay, my teeth aren't going to fall out that one day. It's not about that at all. It's give me space because I am not up in the morning. Like that's what they want. I wanted to also hit on one more thing is that, if your kid tells you you don't know, one of the strategies that I use for the coaching that I do with the kids that I work with is I tell them to make up a story. Tell me a story
Mm,
about someone that's going through this, and I'll just like reiterate their problem in a different way, and they will tell me how that other person wants to be loved or wants their parents to show love or whatever, because it's easier for them to disassociate to their own self and feelings, because sometimes kids feel greedy, sometimes kids feel guilt. There's so you don't know what your kid's feeling and why they can't come to the conclusion of how they want to receive your love. So maybe if
mm,
you just are able to make it up, tell them just to make up a story. It helps them to disassociate to themselves and their emotions, and they're able to communicate to you better of what they want. So just to recap, it's give them space, hear what they want, ask them what they want, change the environment of where you're at and you're talking about it, take action on it. Even if it is that they don't want to talk to you, don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. This is not about you. Remember, you're here to get into your child's mind and their model of their world, not your own. So you're able to share in it. That's
mhm.
what we want as parents. We want to be able to guide and impact our kids. So in order to do that, we cannot be judging them. So is there any other, we're running out of time. There's a few more minutes. Is there any other tips that you would want to tell parents to have this great conversation with their kids?
Um, I think it really comes down to just making the child feel heard and seen, you know? And we've talked about that C on the test scenario of just saying, I see you did your best and giving little actions like that and figuring out if your child doesn't receive verbal compliments, try written, try it in
Mm,
different manners, try to communicate with your kid how they best perceive it. And you'll see, like my mom and I also wrote letters to each other sometimes because sometimes it was easier to write it down and then share how we were feeling and talk about it afterwards. But figuring out a way and understanding it's all a progression. It's a gravel road. There's going to be bumps and it's going to shake a little bit, but you're going to get there and it's going to work. And just having the patience and the love to get through that.
I absolutely love that. And, you know, one way doesn't work for everybody's way, where we have different children. And that's why I say it's not trying to figure out what kind of parent do I want to be for my kid. Am I being a conscious parent? Am I being a mindful parent? It's be the parent your child needs you to be. My kids, all six of them are different. They all receive differently. We all have different conversations. Some of them are more joking, some of them are more sarcastic. I feel like I'm the chameleon with my kids because I got to figure out which one's going to be which to which child, and like my daughter is, you know, a spitting image of me, and that's where we butt heads because I'm trying to guide her from all the, I guess the feelings of hurt and left out that I felt as a child. And what I'm realizing is I got to let her go through this process and I just got to be there for her the way she needs to go through it, not the way I went through it, and that was
Totally.
a really difficult thing for me to grasp a hold of because as a parent, we just want to guide you guys. We just want to, we want to shed you guys from all the pain that we went through. We don't want you to feel it. And yet you're saying, no, I need to feel it because I need to have this experience so I can grow to be the adult that I'm going to be now. Thank you for wanting to shield me from it. And you can't, but
Yeah.
see me as an individual, as a child that you can just love and support and not judge, you know. um, Julia, this has just been an amazing, amazing conversation. Thank you
Yeah.
so much because this really hits the nail on the head when I talk about give your child a childhood they don't have to heal from. It starts with this conversation. And as Julia said, she
Absolutely.
felt this way at 14, at 15, and she had the conversation with her mom and she brought it to her mom. And like Julie said, it doesn't matter who goes first, but somebody needs to go first. If your
Yeah.
kids can't and they don't know how because they're afraid of that judgment, then you go first. Then you be the one to say, hey, you know what? I want to take you out. Let's go to the trampoline park and let's just go jump together.
Mm.
Let's go to the golf course and let's go hit some balls. Let's go to the bowling alley and let's bowl. And it's like what you said that your mom did with your brother and taking him to that like rage area where they just smash everything. And then look what happened in the car. He just kind of had that diarrhea of the mouth, just like coming out with all these things that
Mhm.
he's going through. And your mom was able to just really hold that space for him because, you kind of painted that way for them. Is there any
Yeah.
last thoughts that you'd want to share with our listeners today?
Yeah. I think just going off the last thing that you said is just saying you can do this with any of your children, no matter the age. They can be 3 and you can have that conversation, not obviously to the depth of that you're gonna have with your teenager, but your kid can also be in college already or out of the house or even with your parents. It's a conversation. It's never too late. And as long as you always keep that open door, it might be closed at times, but if you keep it cracked, your kid will at some point or another take you up on it because we all want a relationship with our parents. That's a deep, deep, deep need from every single one of us.
And Julia, you're a spitting image of that now because as you said that as rocky as it was with your mom because of that conversation, not only do you have an amazing mom who shares space for you to make the right decision, she's also still a guide, but then there's a part of her that's your best friend now.
Yeah,
It's
she's the
beautiful,
best. I
beautiful.
wouldn't change it. I'd do it all over again. Just the same.
I love it. I love it so much. If
Yeah.
you are finding value in our conversation here on our show, please join our Redefine Parenting group on Facebook for even more tips and conversations. Do someone you know a favor and share my group with them as well so that they too can hear what they need in order for them to feel supported in their parenting journey. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out www.spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it.